guys, what's up? Another chapter. Here we go. This is chapter 9 of Gospel Fluency by Jeff Vanderstelt. Man, such a good book. I'm very appreciative of the wisdom that God has given Pastor Vanderstelt. And what a cool name, right? Vanderstelt. Sounds like he might be out there killing vampires or something. Who knows? Well, to start this chapter off, I want to go back to a conversation I was having this morning, have a little bit of pastoral counseling going on. And what I ended up saying to the person is completely not just true for them, but it's true for me. And it's highlighted towards the end of this book. And it's the idea that we need a gospel community in our life. And the reason that we need it is because we are so quick to forget it, and we need one another. We need to have the experience of encouragement and the reminder of the gospel. And I think this chapter, which is chapter 9, which is called Fruit to Root, does an excellent job. I know I might say this often, but this is one of the best chapters. One that I need to come back to as a pastor to learn how to better navigate conversations to help diagnose what's going on in people's hearts and in their minds so that we can get to the root of what is causing the fruit. So in the middle of this chapter, let me turn to it and grab the page number here. It's page 122 and 123. There's a graphic, and the graphic is a picture of a tree, and I've seen similar uses of a tree and this idea of fruitfulness played out before in some other counseling conversations, and I think it's a very helpful way to do it. But as someone begins to confess, because this chapter, Jeff shares that he has a conversation with his wife, right? And his wife is all worried for their children. You know, are they going to grow up knowing Jesus? Are they safe going to the school? Are they going to be taught the right things? And, you know, is Jesus going to come through and do, you know, all this sort of like normal parenting worries that any parent will have. And I think this is very important. And, man, it's kind of convicting for me individually, personally. He does just such a good job of, instead of telling someone they're wrong and pointing out all the ways that they're wrong, he helps them process what they're thinking and what they're feeling and what they're believing. And this diagram is a helpful way to remember how to do that. As these feelings and emotions and fears begin to be spoken of, he says it's kind of a type of confession in that moment. That, you know, when we say, well, I'm worried, well, the moment we say that a little bit of a Bible background would tell us that worry is not great. It's not a healthy thing. The Bible calls it a sin. Paul taught, don't worry about anything, right? But with prayer and supplication and thanksgiving, make your requests known to God, and the peace of God will come. So as we make these confessions through exploring where we're at, what we'll be confessing is that there's a fruit that does not look like the kind of fruit that comes from the gospel. And so those diagrams on page 122 and 123, man, they might be helpful to print out and put on a poster and stick on your bathroom mirror or in your car or anywhere that might serve to remind you of what it looks like to trace our thoughts and feelings. Remember, he's previously talked about the value of taking captive every thought and learning to submit it to Christ, which is a gospel reality. This is just another way to have that conversation and think about doing just that. So what we are looking for in this chapter that Jeff is directing us to is this ability, this increased ability to pay attention to our heart and our mind, the words that we say, and instead of just working to address the external, to do it takes a little bit more work, but it gets to the root of the problem. And then we learn to apply the salve of the gospel, right? You know, this truth where we're reminded of what God has done and what judgment exists because of the work of Christ. And it's a judgment where sins are forgiven and restoration is made possible, and an invitation exists for us to believe good news, victory. And we just need that reminder in our life. The fruit of the way that we are living our lives, the way we are experiencing things and expressing those things, it comes from the root of our faith. So what we believe. So if the fruit doesn't look like Jesus, doesn't look like the fruits of the Spirit, if the things that we're experiencing, the way that we're interacting with others, the emotions that we're going through, the actions that we're taking, if they don't look like love and joy and peace, like we're obviously not experiencing life as it is meant to be experienced, abundant life that Jesus would offer us in the gospel. Paul was pretty consistent about making these kind of lists and comparing and contrasting the difference between basically the fruit of the flesh, right? He called it the works of the flesh, but it's the same thing. In Galatians 5:19 through 23, we've got Paul's words right here in this chapter. The works of the flesh are evident. Sexual immorality. We could call that like lust in general, right? I mean, like pornography, like looking towards the sexual experience, be it real or a fantasy, to provide you with peace, this sense of feeling significant. What about impurity? That could show up in any kind of way. Sensuality, it's the same thing. Idolatry, making something that's a good thing more important than the ultimate goodness of the gospel itself. That's what idolatry is. It's when we take something that's good and we make it ultimate. We kind of say, like, we can't be happy if blank isn't happening in our life. And if that blank isn't Jesus, then whatever it is that we have put in that spot where we say, I can't be happy if blank isn't happening, that's an idol. Sorcery, enmity, strife. And strife is just conflict, where instead of living at peace with all men, which is what Paul advocated that through the gospel we should be afforded the ability to do, we find ourselves in conflict with other people. Jealousy, fits of anger, rivalries, dissension and division, envy, drunkenness, orgies, and things like these. I mean, I think we get it, Paul. We get it. When we are experiencing life shalom, meaning not shalom, it's not the way things are supposed to be. We sense frustration. We sense disappointed. We get upset and depressed, and things don't feel okay. All of that is a red flag that should tell us that something is going on, where we're creating this environment in our life and in our heart where we're not applying the gospel, we're not remembering the gospel, we're not believing the gospel or understanding the gospel, because the gospel comes to us through the gift of Jesus on the cross, through what he accomplished for us. It brings the good news that our hearts long to hear. It's news that said everything's okay. I've actually paved the way to make everything right. I've forgiven you for your sins. I've forgiven them for their sins. There is a hope that is coming that will restore all things back to the way that they should be. And when we start believing that, we're getting in tune with the Spirit, and the tuning fork is the tone of the gospel itself. And when we start dialing in to that frequency, which is the gospel, we will start resonating with love, because we're feeling loved from God. Joy, because we're experiencing the joy that comes in hearing good news. Peace and patience. We'll be able to show kindness to others. We'll be known as someone who's good and faithful and gentle, and we have self-control. And these are the things that we should be aspiring to pursue and aspiring to experience. In this chapter 9, Fruit to Root, is all about what it looks like to do that on the ground in a very practical way, just by asking good questions to help people process and expose where they're at. And as people process and expose themselves where their heart is, how are you feeling right now? What are you believing right now? What's true about your life right now? What's true about God? What do you believe about God? These questions are very helpful because they're going to reveal where we are. And a lot of times, because of the deceptiveness of sin and the work of the devil, right? The previous chapter about spiritual warfare happening, man, we will be surprised to find how our hearts have floated away from the gospel and turned to other things. And again, this is why we need a community of people that surround us, that are continually remembering the gospel and working to remember it in their own life, and remembering it for us and with us, and calling us towards a remembrance of the gospel. Because it's in the gospel, again, that we're tuned into the Spirit and able to experience the fruits of the Spirit. And I can't see us wanting anything other than those things. I mean, at the end of the day, say what you will, just the first three fruits of the Spirit, man, love, joy, peace, man, those are the things that everybody's after. Everybody's after those things. Now, they might be thinking that it comes through certain experiences like money or sex or power or privilege. I mean, like, they can be off on their pursuit of it, but at the end of the day, that's what we're all after. We want to be loved. We want to be happy. We want to feel like everything is okay. And the only way that we'll find that and really rest in it as we experience it is in the gospel itself. There were so many parts of this chapter that I just thought I should just read this section. I'm going to hit you with two of them, and then we'll wrap up our time. Here's one. It's at the bottom of page 125. If you wanted to kind of like follow along or take a look at it and do it with me, you can. But it says this: we need more than ourselves and our personal efforts. We need the truth. We need the power of God to save us. We need the gospel. In the gospel, we come to know and believe that God is our forgiver and redeemer and restorer. He has the power over sin and the ability to heal us from sin's effect. When we address only the behaviors and push to change what they do without a change in what we believe, the weight falls on us rather than God to handle the problems of the world and deal with the brokenness caused by sin. So we need this experience. We need to pay more close attention to the fruit in our life and not make the mistake of engaging in a self-change project, just I need to be more loving, but with the help of the Spirit, and ideally in community with others who love Jesus and believe the gospel. We need to practice tracing the root to the fruit, to examine what we've been believing and where our beliefs are not in line with the truth of the gospel. We can confess to one another about our unbelief without fear of condemnation. And we can talk about the sin underneath those sins and how the gospel can be applied to our life in a way that rejuvenates us and frees us up to live in the fruits of the Spirit, which is what we all want. All right, guys, I think you can tell I'm pretty pumped. I might just go back and read this chapter again because it was so good. I hope you're reading along with us, and I hope this book is impacting your life because we really want to see our church grow in gospel fluency. So thanks for listening, guys. Hope it's been helpful.